this live coding experience. It's time we all start learning how to code, but not only for the language, but for the tools that it gives us to create endlessly. Emotional intelligence and academic success go hand in hand. Soft skills like empathy, motivation, and self-awareness are key to leading a fulfilling personal and professional life. Now it's time for the last fireside chat of Enlighted. Last, but definitely not least, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Daniel Goldman. For 12 years, Daniel Goldman wrote the New York Times reporting on the brain and behavioral sciences. His book, Emotional Intelligence, was on the New York Times bestseller list for a year and a half, a bestseller in many countries and in print worldwide in 40 different languages. Apart from his books on emotional intelligence, Goldman has written books on topics including self-deprecation, creativity, transparency, mediation, social and emotional learning, eco-literacy, and the ecological crisis, and the Dalai Lama's vision for the future. Chatting with him today, we have IE Business School's very own Dean, Lee Newman. Originally from the United States, Newman has an interdisciplinary PhD from the University of Michigan in psychology and computer science, which focused on the relationship between neural processing and decision behavior in experience-based learning, and his research has utilized both experimental and computational methods. Welcome, Lee and Daniel. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And particular welcome to Daniel Goldman, who should be arriving shortly. And thank you, Hadi Partovi, for showing us that anyone can code. Hadi mentioned one of the most exciting things that people are coding, which is artificial intelligence, AI. Now, it's interesting because AI has gotten a lot better. Our Siris, our Amazon Alexas, our Google Assistants have become quite smart. And AI at this point can even really read your face and start to recognize your emotions. One of the big questions in computer science is, will machines be able to become self-aware? And will eventually machines actually be able to feel what we're feeling? Open question, and we're definitely not going to answer that today. However, it raises the issue that there's still something special about human intelligence, HI. HI is still different than AI, and there's something special about what we have, special competencies, special skills that we have that computers, at least today, do not. And so there's no better person to be with us today than Daniel Goleman, who is the protagonist for the idea of emotional intelligence, which is a critical part of human intelligence. So welcome.
And I can't hear Lee at all.
Welcome, Dan.
Lee, I don't hear you.
So we're having a non-empathetic moment where we're going to switch later and be empathetic when we can hear each other. Can you hear me now?
Lee, I don't know. Okay.
Well, we may have to bring up Valeria again to code Daniel Goleman. Can you hear us now? Can you hear us now, Dan?
Oh, yeah, okay. Hi. I got you. Okay.
So I was just saying there's something special about human intelligence, and particularly emotional intelligence, that machines don't quite have yet. And so I wanted to start us off on the same footing by having Daniel Goldman, Dan Goldman, share with us what exactly is emotional intelligence? What are these special competencies? And what are the behaviors that distinguish people who have higher and lower emotional intelligence?
Sure. Here's what machines can't do so far and what people do really well. It's the elements of emotional intelligence. It includes self-awareness, knowing what you're thinking and feeling and how it's affecting what you do. Self-management, applying that information to manage your disturbing emotions, to stay focused, to work toward your goals, to stay optimistic, to be adaptable. Tuning into other people, empathy, knowing what they're feeling without them telling you in words, because people never tell us in words, they tell us in nonverbals, tone of voice. And then finally, putting that all together to have highly effective relationships. to be able to influence people, to guide them, to listen, to communicate, to inspire them, to resolve conflicts if you need to, but also to work together as a team toward whatever it is you need to do together.
And any of those that are particularly challenging for us, even though there are special skills that computers don't have, any one of them that you think is the one that the most people would need to work on?
I think the common cold of the workplace is poor listening. Too often we listen in a way where we're thinking about what am I going to say next rather than what is the person saying to me, or we cut people off without having them finish their thought, and we take over the conversation. This is frustrating for the other person, but it's all too common.
And so we have, just to summarize, so we have self-awareness, we have self-regulation, and we have empathy, and we have this critical skill of human relationships, how we interact with each other. So I think that's a good place just to take a quick pause. And I want to ask each of you to think about those four things. Which one are you strongest at, and which one do you think is the one that you might work on of those four key ingredients of emotional intelligence? Something to think about. Moving to the next question. So when we talk to companies, and we spend a lot of time talking to companies at IE and the university to understand what they want in terms of skills. And of course they want hard skills, computer science and other skills like that. But what we hear over and over again is that they want soft skills. And I think there's nothing soft about soft skills. Do you agree, Dan?
I think there's a hard business case for so-called soft skills.
Exactly.
Yes.
So we hear it over and over again. Companies want soft skills. So that we know, but then we also know as educators that sometimes it's a tough sell. So an 18-year-old, a 25-year-old in school, or even corporate employees, for those of you working in HR, in training. It's a tough sell sometimes. Students often want to only focus on the hard skills, and the soft skills are a little bit tougher. So I'd love for you to help us with the sale. How do we make the hard sell for the soft skills?
Here's what you don't know when you're in school, and what you need to know when you get into the workplace. Your hard skills, your tech skills, software and so on, are going to help you get in the workplace, help you get the job. But once you're in that position, you're now competing with people who are just about as smart and skilled as you are. And now the soft skills take dominance in what distinguishes, an outstanding performer from average. This is something you're not told in school. School rewards the hard skills. You work for your grade in math, you work for your grade in whatever it may be, but what you're doing is honing hard skills. That's important, it's necessary, it's just not sufficient for success, and particularly as an entrepreneur, because it turns out for entrepreneurs, the ability to be adaptable, the ability to relate, the ability to form a team, the ability to inspire people are absolutely essential. Those are so-called soft skills, but they have hard outcomes in terms of who's successful and who's not.
So for students out there, please take note, the hard sell for soft skills. We as educators, so this is an education conference, a tech and innovation in education. And what I'm wondering is, what can we do better as universities or as high schools or even as corporate training departments? What can we do better to train these critical skills of emotional intelligence?
Well, it turns out, and this is the good news, all of this can be learned, and it's learnable at any point. You can always get better in the emotional intelligence domain, and there's good reason to. I just saw a study that was done at a global manufacturing company. Engineers are asked to rate each other in their effectiveness as engineers, and it turns out the rating has zero correlation with IQ, with their cognitive ability, highly correlated with emotional intelligence. That's motivational information. But if you want to work on this, you have to realize that it's a different mode of learning that you need. It's the way you would learn any skill, like golf your golf stroke. You have to keep practicing. It's the same with these skills, with listening, for example. In the cognitive domain, you can learn things in a single lesson. It's called one-trial learning. But to get better and better at listening, for example, or managing your own disturbing emotions, you need repeated rehearsal, because what you're doing is training your brain. The brain works like a muscle. Every time you go to a gym and work a weight to do more reps, you're making that muscle that much stronger. Every time you stop a bad habit in the emotional intelligence domain and replace it with a good one, you're making the circuitry for that much stronger. So it takes repeated practice. It also takes knowing what you're doing and focusing on learning one thing at a time, not trying to improve everything all at once.
So to follow up on your golf analogy, I mean, one thing about golf is I hit that ball and I see where it goes, and I know it's completely off course, and so I get instant feedback. But I go into a meeting, whether I'm in class, whether I'm in the workplace, I go into a meeting and I make a comment that's not delivered very well, or I'm rude, or I do something that just isn't very productive. Unless I'm really good at reading someone else's face, I'm not really getting feedback. So how do we provide that kind of feedback in the workplace or in schools to help people learn?
Lee, I'd say two things. One is you do pick it up very often. You know that comment landed with a thud. People didn't light up when you said that thing. That's in the moment feedback. You may or may not get it all the time. But this is why it's good to have, for example, a learning group or a learning partner or a coach who can work with you and help you, for example, rehearse or help you review, and also help you not get too down about it, because you're going to have bad days. You're going to have times when the stress or the time pressure makes you do things in the old, wrong way, like I cut that person off. I'm trying to get better at listening. And they can help you see that as an opportunity for learning something rather than thinking, oh, I'm no good at this and I better give up. So I would say ongoing learning needs somewhere or someone you can practice with.
And where does self-awareness fit here? Because if I'm a person who, just by bad luck, am naturally not very self-aware, is that a handicap? Because I'm just not getting those signals from other people. I don't have the feedback that I need to develop. So what do I do?
Yeah, exactly. Self-awareness is a little bit tricky. There are two kind of strategies for it that I can think of. One is to get feedback from someone who's with you. Other people may notice when you, for example, did something that you were clueless about, but maybe upset someone or just did not work. They can tell you that. The other thing is, and I strongly recommend it, mindfulness practice. Mindfulness is an attention training method for tuning into your thoughts and your feelings regularly so that you strengthen the internal brain circuitry that helps you sense what's going on in you right now.
So let me pause there just to maybe deliver a takeaway, which is, I think this, and Dan, tell me if you agree, but if we don't know what our self-awareness is, right? I mean, it's a little bit of a catch-22. If you're not that self-aware, well, you're not that aware that you're not that self-aware. So maybe one strategy here is to not trust yourself so much all the time. And I don't mean trust in the sense of self-confidence, but if I'm in a meeting and I just am not clear on the signals I'm getting, I need to ask. And I need to have a safe work environment, of course, in which to be able to ask. But maybe one strategy is to err towards asking more rather than asking less. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's a good learning strategy. We have some data on this, by the way. It really supports what you're saying, Lee. People who have a large gap on what's called a 360, where they ask other people who know them well to evaluate them, who have a gap between how they rate themselves and how other people rate them on the emotional intelligence domain. There's an assessment for this, the Emotional and Social Competence Inventory, which is in Spanish too, by the way. The ESCI data that we have says that if you have a big gap, if you're poor at self-awareness as others see you, you're less likely, far less likely to have strengths in other emotional intelligence competencies. If your gap is small, which means you have pretty good self-awareness, you see yourself pretty much as others see you, then you're going to have strengths in many, many emotional intelligence competencies. So self-awareness is fundamental.
Noted. So let's move on to another topic. We have many students here who are potential entrepreneurs. This is a conference where many people are working in ed tech, in startups. So I know you've been doing some work recently that you mentioned to me earlier about the relationship between emotional intelligence and entrepreneurship. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is not my own data, but new data I've seen in a peer-reviewed journal that shows, as I mentioned in passing, that people who are strong in emotional intelligence turn out to be more successful as entrepreneurs. And when you think about what an entrepreneur has to do, it makes a lot of sense. You need to be able to manage yourself, to keep your disruptive emotions from doing you in, for example, to manage them, to be able to stay pretty optimistic, because entrepreneurs often have a hard time, difficult getting that funding right away. There are many obstacles, but if you're able to stay optimistic and keep going toward your goals, then you're more likely to make it as an entrepreneur. The other thing is your relationships, because to be a successful entrepreneur, you want to gather a team and you want to inspire that team. You want to keep reminding them of what's so great about this particular enterprise that we're all involved in. So being able to inspire other people to articulate that shared mission or meaning that resonates with other people is an emotional intelligence strength. Being able to work together on a team to make people feel, yes, I belong here, and I love being here. I love being part of this team. Every entrepreneur is going to need to do that, because you are assembling what's going to be the heart of your organization if you succeed.
So you're, in some ways you're talking about leadership, management in the context of the entrepreneurial environment. Let's move to leadership more generally. So you've said in Harvard Business Review articles and other places something that I find quite intriguing as someone who teaches leadership here at IU University. You've said the primary mission of leadership is directing attention. Primary mission of leadership is directing attention, which is not what most people say when they talk about leadership. So could you tell us a little bit about what exactly do you mean there? And I think this makes contact with the triple focus, which I think is an interesting concept as well to share.
Yeah, it comes out of the article, the triple focus. What I was pointing out is the leader needs three kinds of focus. That's that self-awareness. It helps you manage yourself. The first task of a leader is to lead yourself. And that means paying attention to yourself. But then the second task is leading others. This is what most people think of as leadership, leading others. The part about leading yourself, which I think is crucial, is pretty invisible in most leadership narratives. But being able to relate to people, to, as I said, to inspire them, being able to direct them. And directing their attention means to what it is we're doing together. And each person who has a different role will apply that differently. So for example, the person who's doing your books, the person doing accounting, the CRO, or the head of HR as you grow bigger, or the COO, each of those people will direct their attention according to their role. And then finally, there's a third level of attention, which is the systems you're operating in. What the competition is doing, how the tech is changing, what the culture fads are, how society is going, the economy. All of this impinges, all of it affects your strategy moment to moment. So a good leader has all three kinds of focus.
And how exactly do we direct attention? I mean, are we talking about actually the cognitive function of attention that you're saying we should put to use in ourselves with others and with the system, or is there a way as a leader to direct the attention more actively of other people?
I think you can do it this way. when you articulate a strategy, what you're saying is pay attention to this in this way. And if you remind people about that regularly, not in a clunky way, like, okay, here's our strategy and here's how we're going to pay attention to this, but rather, for example, in the flow of things. So when you're talking to your COO, your chief operating officer, I'd like you to pay attention to this and that. Or when you're talking to the head of your human resources or R&D, whoever it may be, you remind them that here's where we're going, here's what our strategy is, and here's your particular unique way of attending to that.
And that sounds very different than one of those little bad behaviors that we alluded to earlier of micromanaging, right? So micromanaging, it's not about me directing attention, it's about me actually telling my people, my team, what they should be doing. And I think what you're suggesting here is something very different. It's lighter.
Yeah, so the problem with micromanaging is the micro. It's getting too much in the bushes, and getting too detailed and hectoring people with small bits of what they need to do. What I'm talking about is a little more casual, but intentional and purposeful. Just bringing it up and bringing it up repeatedly as a reminder, not in a way where the person feels that you don't believe they're competent. This is the problem with micromanaging, is that what you're telling people by micromanaging is you don't know how to do the job. I'm going to have to do it for you or remind you how to do it. This is a lighter touch, but I think it's an important touch.
And while we're on attention, you mentioned mindfulness earlier. And so in the mid-90s, I was working as an entrepreneur in a startup in New York City. Very stressful period of time, raising money, trying to get product out the door. And I found my way to mindfulness practice at that time. And for me, it was an amazing asset that stayed with me for a very long time. It helped me really perform at much better levels than I would have without it. So could you share with us a little bit, what exactly is mindfulness practice in a nutshell? I know it's a big topic. But more importantly, what is the link to emotional intelligence, and what does it have to do with optimal performance?
It's very directly related to both emotional intelligence and optimal performance. The top of the performance curve, optimal performance, peak performance, has two wings. One is performance drops if you are stressed, highly stressed, and the other is performance drops if you're not focused or motivated. And the twofer from mindfulness is it makes you both more focused and calmer. So you can handle stress better. And we have lots of data on this. You get triggered less often. When you're triggered, it's less strong, and you recover more quickly. That's the operational definition of resilience. The time it takes to go from the peak of stressed out to back to calm. And the quicker that peak, the more resilient, the quicker the drop, rather, the more resilient you are. So we know that mindfulness makes people better able to handle their stress. And every entrepreneur is going to face lots of stress. The other part is it helps you stay focused because you're actually priming and strengthening your capacity to attend. The way mindfulness does this is that you remind yourself when your mind wanders off to bring it back. It's very simple, but that is the rep. That's the repetition for the brain circuitry involved. This is what's going to make the circuitry for paying attention, for focusing stronger, doing it regularly. And we find our data says the more you do it, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you can do every day, and doing it regularly, just the way you do your fitness workout regularly. It's a mental fitness workout. So you need to make it part of your day every day to have it be really effective.
And just out of curiosity, I'd love to see a show of hands. How many people out there would say that they meditate, do mindfulness practice, some related practice on a relatively frequent basis? Please raise your hand. So I don't know, Dan, if you can see the audience, but it looks to me about 30, 40%. So how are we doing? I think we haven't hit your aspirations yet.
I'd like to see it 90 to 100, but That's going to take time. I think frankly, Lee, I think it should be part of every curriculum for many reasons. I've been in a classroom of 7-year-olds in Spanish Harlem, a very impoverished part of Manhattan. And I've seen these kids do this every day, and it keeps them very calm and very focused. And it helps the teacher teach. Kids can learn better when they do this. This is why I think it should be part of curriculum from kindergarten through university. And by the way, business school, why not? So I think 30 or 40% is pretty good. I'd like to see higher.
Well, I don't know if it makes you happy, but we have recently launched a Center for Health, Well-Being, and Happiness, and mindfulness is one key ingredient.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So for the 60% of the people here at least, and we have many people online joining us as well, who didn't raise their hand, there's a lot of science, there's a growing body of science on mindfulness, justifying it in the sense of behavioral improvement, but also brain science as well. Could you give us a flavor for what kind of science can we bring to the table to convince other people that this is real and important?
Well, one thing that students may be interested in is a study out of University of California that showed that students who do mindfulness actually did better on their GREs, on the graduate school entrance exam. People learn better. It enhances what's called working memory. There's a good argument for making it part of what you do in school. We also know, as I said, that it helps people be calm under stress or recover more quickly from stress. It helps people pay attention better, which I think may be one part of why you learn better. In other words, it has lots of benefits. It's also good for your health. It turns out that the technical term is down-regulates the genes that create inflammation. There are many chronic health problems. Students don't yet have them probably, but things like diabetes, hypertension, arthritis, asthma are all inflammatory disorders. And it turns out that this kind of practice, when done regularly over time, helps you manage that. So I'm glad your Center for Health and Well-Being includes mindfulness. Makes a lot of sense.
And just to make it clear for students in the room, so he did say that mindfulness practice has been shown to help students do better on exams and deal better with stress. So I think that's a motivator. Should be.
That's what got me into it. It was the stress part. I didn't know about the other part.
So I'd like to now shift gears a little bit. Could I have the slides, please? So we sent out a survey to all of the registrants for the Enlighted conference. And early this morning, we had 1,566 respondents. It's gone over 2,000 now. And we asked a simple question about behavior, the kinds of behaviors that we're talking about with Dan. So we said, look, all of us have little bad behaviors that we develop in the workplace or at school. We're under stress. How many people say they deal with stress on a daily basis? Please raise your hand. So when we're stressed, when there's high demand on us, sometimes we get impatient. Sometimes we stop listening. There's many little behaviors that we do, and then we get in the habit of repeating them, and they become a little bit more automatic. So the question that we put to you, for those who answered it, was, if you think about these little unproductive behaviors at work or in school, kind of like muscles, which are the muscles that you would take to the gym to strengthen a bit to make yourself a better person or a better professional? And there was 22 to choose from. And what we found is that on average, people who responded to this survey, almost 2,000 people, chose 8 of 22. 8 of 22. I have 8 behavioral muscles I need to train to be a better person or a better professional. Would you say there's a little bit of self-awareness shown there? 8 out of 22?
That's pretty good.
I mean, this is self-admitted, needs for some training. So what I'd like to do now is look at what are the most common behaviors that you, our audience, our registrants of this conference, said you have the most challenge to deal with on a daily basis. So let's head there. Dan, can you see the slides?
I see them, yes.
Great. So the number one most common little bad behavior that you said challenges you in your daily life and your daily work, with 51% of you saying it's a muscle that needs to be strengthened. And by the way, I did not rig this, is better controlling my emotions in difficult situations. That sounds a little bit like emotional intelligence. So I won't ask you to relate that one to emotional intelligence because it was the first dimension or the second dimension that you shared with us. But what I want to ask you, Dan, is what are some concrete things that we can do to get better? Why is this hard for us, and what can we do? What can we do starting Monday morning to do a better job at regulating our emotions?
Lee, can I show people one thing that helps on the spot? This is used by the military. It's been proven in lab data to shift physiology instantly from out of control to back to in control. Technically, sympathetic nervous system arousal, that's when you're uptight and stressed out, to parasympathetic arousal. That means you're more relaxed. That's the recovery mode of the body. And it's really simple, and you can do it when you need it. It goes like this. You take a deep breath in, so your stomach goes out. You hold it for as long as is comfortable, and you exhale for as long as you can. And you do that 6 to 9 times. You inhale, at least to a count of 4, or maybe more. You hold it for a count of 4 or more, and you exhale for a count of 4 or more. That's on the spot, when you're just losing it and you need to calm down. And then the other thing you can do, as Lee mentioned, is a regular mind training exercise. And I recommend using the breath as your focus. And I'll talk you through it, but you need to do it on your own. It's very simple. You bring your attention to your breath, to the natural flow. You don't control your breath. The full inhalation, the full exhalation, breathing in, breathing out. And you keep your attention there, maybe on the sensation at your nostrils or rise and fall of your belly. And then when your mind wanders off, and it will, and you notice it wandered, bring it back and start with your next breath. That is the basic exercise in mindfulness. And it's been shown that this simple exercise helps people be more calm, triggered less, as I said, and also you're strengthening attention, because what it is that diminishes our focus, our attention, is when our mind wanders off. And by the way, the most powerful distractors are emotional distractors. That thing he said to me that got me so upset, or why didn't they answer my email, whatever it may be. So you want to see that thought come and then let it go and go back to your breath. That strengthens your ability to control your emotions in difficult situations.
And I can imagine if I'm by myself, obviously that works very well. If I'm in a meeting at work with 5 people staring at me around the room, do I excuse myself if the emotions are really high and sort of do it in the hallway and say, listen, I really need a snack? Or how do I make it happen? I'm sorry, it's a typical MBA type question that we would get in class, right? But so, from a practical standpoint, I'm in the meeting. Is a few breaths going to be good enough, you think, to slow me down, to change the nervous system response?
I don't think people would notice you're doing the deep breathing, taking in a deep breath, holding it, and exhaling. I think you can actually get away with that in a meeting. The payoff from the mindfulness, from the breath practice, is slower and more gradual. It seeps into your life. You'll find that in difficult situations, you're less reactive. Things that would have triggered you don't do that so much anymore. That's the kind of payoff you get. So I would say it's good to have both kinds, something you can do in the moment, surreptitiously. I have a friend who is an expert on marital arguments, which is a really stressful situation. He says that if the husband and wife are having an argument, the best thing they can do is separate for 20 minutes. This is not practical in a business setting. But it might be useful advice for people in their lives.
In their personal
because
lives.
Them calm down and come back in a more reasonable way.
What about the strategy? I mean, there's the bully on the playground strategy where bullies are taught to count to 3 when they get angry, so that it puts a little bit of a time gap between their action and their thinking. Would something like that work for emotions in a meeting? Difficult conversation?
Actually is invoking mindfulness. When you pause, it's a mindful pause. When you stop the emotion that's building, also something that helps a lot is to name it. I'm getting angry now. I'm getting stressed out now. It turns out that shifts energy from the circuitry in the brain, the amygdala particularly, that gets you upset or angry, to the part of the brain that manages it, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center. So naming to yourself what's going on is something you can do silently on the spot that might help too.
Okay, so quick summary. Things as simple as breathing exercises in the moment and naming your emotions to sort of nominalize them in some sense. 2 easy strategies that all of us could do. Let's move on to number 2. So little bad behavior number 2 that comes from our audience at 50%. So 1 out of every 2 of you who answered the survey said that this is a problem for you, is resisting distractions to work in a more focused way. So I promise we did not rig this to set up emotional intelligence, but that's number 2, and I guess that fits quite well with what we talked about before with attention. Why is it so hard for us to resist distractions, in your opinion, and what are some simple strategies we can do to try to stay more focused?
Well, one of the problems of life today is that we get more input than the brain was designed for. One study suggests that people get 5 times more information every day than was true, say, 20 years ago. And there's a saying in cognitive science that a wealth of information means a poverty of attention. The reason is that our attention bandwidth is restricted. The reason phone numbers are a certain length is because that's about the width of what's called working memory, what we can hold in our mind at one time, the scope of attention. So we're constantly challenging that. And to get back to what I said before, mindfulness is attention training. The stronger you can be in managing your own attention, the better you can be at resisting distractions. Remember I said, when you get distracted, when your mind wanders off and you notice it's wandered, bring it back to your breath. But that goes just as well for the task at hand. When you realize that, there was this famous study at Stanford, by the way, about exactly this point. When you're focused on something really important and then you say, I better check that text I just got or that email, then you find yourself doom scrolling on the web, looking at this and that, and then you realize, I'm supposed to be doing that thing. When you go back to it, when your attention at first, before you wandered, was way up, now it's way down. And it takes you a while to ramp up unless you did that mindfulness practice that day. Then it turns out that your attention is still pretty high, or it takes you much less time to get back. So by strengthening attention, and that's what these mind training exercises do, it helps you resist distractions at work.
It's almost like mindfulness is the killer training app for catching yourself doing what you were not intending to do, right? So it's like lifting a weight. So my mind wanders, I catch it, I bring it back. You do that over and over again, and then all of a sudden you're now able to do that in a meeting, for example, where before you weren't able to do it. Or with a mobile phone beeping, you're able to ignore it, where before maybe you weren't.
Precisely, because what you've done is strengthen the neural circuitry, the brain circuits, for paying attention where you want it, when you want it.
So that's another pitch for the 60% of you who aren't yet doing mindfulness practice, something to think about. Let me move to number 3. So this one, we've got a tie, we have an empate between 2 little bad habits. The first one is procrastination. So a lot of us are saying that we just leave the important tasks for last minute, and that's a shame because then we have to rush to do them, and sometimes we don't do them as well. And on a related note, the tying habit is people are saying that they don't prioritize tasks the way they would like, that the little less important tasks often seem to push out the more important tasks that we'd like to do. I think we could probably tell a story here about how that relates to emotional intelligence, but I'm going to cut you some slack. I just wanted to show that one and move to number 4, which I think is a bit more interesting from the standpoint of emotional intelligence. So here we've got 40% of our respondents saying they want to be better listeners. So we interrupt each other, we're mind wandering, we're not paying attention. Why is it so hard to be a good listener? Because for many of us, we are challenged. And here, what can we do about it that might be a little different from some of the other ideas that you suggested?
You know, this is a huge problem in life, not just at work, particularly in any dyad that's what's called asymmetrical in power. If one person is more powerful than the other, they tend to pay less attention to the other person and to cut them off more. So as you, for example, become a leader in an organization or as an entrepreneur, this is something you really have to be self-aware of, to be mindful of. How are you listening? Because when we're not listening well, we're sending a message that what that person is saying or what they think doesn't matter to us. It actually is very hurtful to the other person, or can be. So to be a better listener, we need to be self-aware. We need to realize that the core of empathy is being present, paying full attention to the person you're with. And this is a habit that can be strengthened by repeated practice and by becoming aware of it in the first place and monitoring it in yourself. Am I listening the person out? And at first, by the way, you may get very impatient. All of these things are a little difficult. Here's something I'd like you all to try. Cross your arms.
So let's try this.
Yeah, now cross them the other way with the other arm on top. That feels a little weird, right? Doesn't feel comfortable. That's what it's like to learn a new habit. The habit that we've rehearsed 10,000 times at least is poor listening. But to listen the person out and then say what you have to say, or even to say back to them in other words what you think you heard them say, that's the good way to listen. That's active listening. But poor listening is cutting the person off. And it's going to feel funny at first because you'll be impatient, you might be a little frustrated, but it's really worth doing because then you'll become the kind of person, as a good listener, who people feel comfortable with, people feel safe with, people feel is a good boss. So I really encourage working on this habit. And you work on it by monitoring it, and also, if you can, getting feedback on it from someone who you feel safe with, who you trust.
So I actually have a little admission to make. So I did get feedback across my parts of my professional career. And in fact, there's some people who I work with who are in this room. And, you know, I was told that, I have my badge here somewhere. I was told that I'm a member of the Bad Listeners Club. And I wear this badge, not particularly with pride. It's a very large club, and I would love it if many of you are not members. But I was told that I'm not a great listener, so I've been working on that, and I actually run a training methodology called habit hacking, where we use habit loops to analyze these habits to make them specific. And it turns out there are at least 4 different types of bad listening. In my case, it has a lot to do with being an energetic person. And so when I'm listening for too long, I just can't take it because I want to get in on that conversation. I want to contribute. I want it to be more interactive. So at first I tried just forcing myself to listen mindfully. And that lasted about 30 seconds. And then I went nuts and I said, that's just not going to work. So what I discovered is that by politely interrupting or paraphrasing or asking to make a clarifying comment or to pose a clarifying question, it created a different dynamic and it made it easier for me in that particular case. So I just wanted to share that. It's a big club. How many of you might be in the Bad Listeners Club with me? I've got a lot of hands, Dan. It's a big club, and we've got to work on it. Okay, let me move to the last one, number 5. This is the big 5 here. So again, 40% of the people that took this thing said that this was one of their problems that they face is micromanaging. They're micromanagers, and they would like to not micromanage so much. Fundamentally, these are people who want good results, right? I mean, everybody, you want good results, but you want them so badly that you don't trust others enough to let them do their thing. And so you've got your hands in everything if you're a micromanager. So why is this hard? And what are some strategies that we can do for those of us who are micromanagers? I won't ask you to raise your hand, but what can our micromanagers do to get better?
You know, this is a huge problem in the workplace, particularly after the 2008 financial crisis. A lot of people got promoted into management and executive positions because they got results. But they got results by micromanaging, by pushing people, by pressuring people. And it turned out that hollowed out the human capital of their organizations because people don't like it. So I would say that one of the antidotes to micromanaging is empathy. Trying to take the perspective of the other person. What is it like to be micromanaged? It says to the other person that whoever's doing the micromanaging doesn't think I'm competent, doesn't think I know how to do my job. The most effective leaders, the most effective managers set a goal. They tell people what they need to achieve, then they leave them alone to get there in their own way. They give feedback on whether they're reaching the goal. They don't tell them how to do their job. This is a different approach. So I would suggest using this other strategy of letting people be free to get there any way they want, but being very explicit and giving performance feedback on whether they get there at all or how well they do.
Oh, great. Thank you for that. And some good tips for micromanagers. We are just about out of time. So I wanted to ask, this is an education conference with a lot of people working in education, a lot of people studying for students, people who are doing startups to innovate and provide technology for education. Any messages, key messages for us in the world of education from the standpoint of emotional intelligence? Parting words from Daniel Goleman.
Yeah. I saw some data where makes executives were asked, do these soft skills, emotional intelligence, does it matter? Huge majority say yes, it makes all the difference. When they ask people who are just new to the workplace, very few realize the importance. I think there's a learning curve. You have to find out in the workplace itself, starting a business or joining an organization, that actually these human skills matter immensely. And I'd encourage you all to have a very fast learning curve on that.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to just make a few closing comments myself. So we've heard about emotional intelligence. It's a set of competencies, 4 of them in particular that Dan shared at the very beginning, that are uniquely human, that are important to us. These are things that can affect our performance. So we learned about that, but I think we also saw from the data, and I think we also learned that they don't come for free. I mean, some of us, yes, maybe higher in emotional intelligence, so some of those dimensions than others, but we don't get it for free. We need to work to become emotionally intelligent. We need to put some effort into developing emotional intelligence in these different dimensions. So something to think about, which of those 4 things that Dan Goleman mentioned, self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, or social relations, is the one that you might work on after today? Something to think about. The other comment I'd like to make is I think that there are many big problems in this world that are happening now. You know, we've handed a difficult world to the younger generations, many global problems to be solved. And I would argue that probably to solve many of them, we need collective thinking and we need collective action. And of course, the word collective invokes the idea of emotional intelligence. So I'd like you to imagine for a minute a world in which each of us work a little bit to become better listeners. We invest a little bit in listening more to each other and considering more the diversity of ideas that we get from the people around us. Imagine a world where we're able to say no to distractions more easily and focus a little bit more on ourselves and focus a little bit more in a higher quality way on other people without those distractions. Imagine a world where we're just a bit better, each of us, in self-awareness. Each of us are better able to regulate ourselves in the moments that matter. Each of us are more empathetic. We're able to be with each other in a higher quality way. And imagine a world where we invest just a bit more in these critical relationships that Dan Goleman shared with us, those relationships that we missed so much when many of us were confined during the pandemic. So imagine that world. I mean, that's a world personally that I would like to be part of. I think it's probably a world that you would like to be part of. But it's not going to happen unless each of us makes the effort to improve ourselves in these critical human dimensions of emotional intelligence. So I invite you to think about, when are you going to start and what will you work on? Because probably the best time to start is now. So thanks very much to all of you for attending. Thank you for those who filled out our survey. And thank you very much to Dan Goldman. A big round of applause.
Thank you.